and welcome to another episode of Sustainment TV. I'm your host, David McDonald, and before we get into today's video, please feel free to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel. It will help me improve upon what I do. But without any further delay, let's get right into today's video. During this adventure we call life, challenges may come up from time to time. Eventually, we may even have setbacks, even experience loss. For today's video, I wanted to present just some basic ways of coping with grief. I had a chance to have a good conversation with a good friend of mine. He's a decorated military veteran and a licensed grief counselor. I hope you enjoyed today's presentation with Dr. Olric Wilkins. All right, Sustainment TV, we would like to welcome a very distinguished man, a man I have a lot of respect and admiration for, my church uncle. I tell you, it's been a while since I've been able to have an in-depth conversation. I'm very glad that you could join us, Dr. Wilkins. How are you doing today?
I am doing wonderful, and I am delighted to be here with you.
All right. I know something that's very common with with the human experience is dealing with grief. At some times in our life, in on one level or another, we'll experience some sense of loss, and so grief is something that at one point or another we'll all have to deal with. So I wanted to get a subject matter expert such as yourself, just to run some common questions by you to get some feedback from you. What I would like for you to do, sir, just to kind of let everyone know your background in grief management or grief counseling as a whole. Just kind of give you a background, sir.
Yeah, I did a doctoral degree in grief resolution. I did my doctorate of ministry at the Assemblies of God Theological Seminary in Springfield, Missouri, and my dissertation, which was about 250 pages, was based on grief resolution. How to get over the grief process, how to get through the grief process. And I've had experience on the battlefield using this with Marines and sailors and family members who suffer tremendous losses, if you will.
Okay, so let's go ahead and jump right into it. I know a lot of times people, they may ask themselves why they're coping with grief. Am I going crazy? I mean, what would be your response to that?
My response to that will be, if they are in acute grief and they are stuck there, they could have the feeling of going crazy. Let me tell you what acute grief is. Dr. Lindman, he is a doctor at Harvard University. He gave us 5 stages of what he calls acute grief. Number 1 is somatic distress. Now, by somatic distress, he is speaking about pain and fatigue that leads to other emotional problems and are preventing a person from reaching their full capabilities or potential, if you will. The second thing he gives us is having a constant preoccupation with the deceased. In other words, they can't seem to get the image of the deceased person out of their minds. They are preoccupied with the person to such an extent that that is the only thing they can talk about. In other words, they can't get beyond it. And so that also can lead to a person not being able to reach their full potential. A third thing he gave us is guilt. Now, whenever we lose someone that is very near and dear to us, of course, some people experience more guilt than others. They blame themselves. Oh, if I had done this, if I had done that, perhaps I could have done more, you see. And once you start blaming yourself, there's a good possibility that that's where you will stay. You will not get beyond that. And that could be extremely dangerous. Then there is number 4, what he calls hostile reactions. You don't want to interact with people. You're angry at the world. You're angry at everybody. You blame doctors because they operate or fail to operate. You see, human nature is such that we must find somebody to blame. And once you get stuck there again, you cannot make any headway or any progress in the grief process. And then number 5, you have the lost pattern of conduct, which means the things you used to do, the way you used to carry yourself. You see, you just don't want to get back there. You don't want to find yourself doing those things again because you feel in so doing, you're being unfaithful to the loved one.
Okay. So,
and that could be detrimental as well.
So,
but no, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, so in that regard, almost denying oneself a sense of normalcy. Is that what I'm hearing?
Absolutely, for the most part, that's right. You see, and when you do that, of course, it can be very detrimental to you, and before you know it, you can feel like, yes, perhaps I'm going crazy because I have no desire to do anything else but just sit here thinking or stewing in my loss.
I know sometimes the question people may pose to themselves or maybe even to others when they're trying to talk about it, why has this happened to me?
Yes. Well, I'll tell you, loss is unique to each of us because we all suffer different losses. We all react differently. But losses in general is a universal phenomenon. We are all going to suffer losses in this pilgrimage called life. But how we respond to our losses is what will make the difference. Now, we do not control death. Death is part of life. It is part of living. However, there are other losses that can walk or march into a person's life. Take, for instance, we live in a very mobile society, and there are times when family have to pick up and move, leaving children, of course, to suffer tremendous grief. Even the family members, the fathers and mothers, they suffer grief as well, because when you leave an area, you're leaving good friends behind. You're leaving a good church family, perhaps. And these things, they generate grief. Grief has to do with losses. Any loss in your life can generate grief. The breakup of a relationship, the loss of a pet, all these things can generate grief. So again, when a person says, why in the world did this have to happen to me? It's not unusual to hear that. But that's because the person who says that is not really thinking rationally. But as long as you're alive, you're going to experience some type of grief. But your response, or lack of it thereof, will make all the difference.
That's good. And you know, the fact that you mentioned, you know, the different levels of different types of losses, you know, divorce, loss of job, loss of friends, you know, all those things, you know, various things that people have to kind of navigate through. So that's real good. I know another thing that I've personally seen come up with others, you know, when trying to navigate, you know, through transition and healing and all that, you know, what to do with the personal belongings of someone.
Well, that's a very good question. Again, that is unique to each individual. And let me tell you why. When we suffer a loss, especially of a spouse or a father or mother, whatever the case might be, or a child, we immediately find ourselves in what we call stage one. When we experience loss, we immediately go through a stage of shock. That's usually the first stage of the grief process. And in that stage, of course, we realize, or at least we need to realize, that God has made us in such a way that we are able to withstand pain and sorrow and even tragedy. Shock is something that God has given us. It's a temporary form of anesthesia. And so it gives us some time to kind of get ourselves together. Now, shock usually lasts, maybe a few minutes, a few hours, even a few days, a few weeks. And during that time, of course, our thought processes are going. Now, when you have someone like a spouse and he or she passes on, we need some time to process the loss before we start giving away the belonging. However, we need to give away the belongings. Not everything. There might be something you might want to keep. Something that maybe you purchased for him or her that you like. But at the same time, let me tell you where the danger lies. When you close their closet with everything that's in it untouched, and day after day, you go and you stand before that closet door. You don't want anyone to go in there to interrupt anything. That can take you down a road of depression and isolation. So I would venture to say, you don't have to give away all the belongings the day after the pass. But at the same time, you don't want to hold on to them forever. Because in so doing, that could hinder your grief process. It could slow it down and perhaps take you down a dark road where you don't want to go. So maybe 6 months down the road, maybe even sooner. I can tell you when my wife passed away, I had all the family members there, and so many had come from far away. So I felt it was a good time for them to get a few of the dresses they wanted and things of that nature. So I did that. But I kept a few things for me, you see. Not so much to dwell on, but of course, for posterity purposes.
That's one of those things where I know with, the experience, that I've had with that, I know that, I guess, between, you know, family on her side as well as family on my side, like you're saying, kind of, some keepsakes, scarves, or, some jewelry that, she may have worn, some shoes. It's like,
Right.
my
Right.
daughter and my wife, they wear their shoe size is the same. So, a lot of the, some of the footwear that, that she liked and kind of had a crossover style appeal to it. She actually incorporated in her wardrobe. So it's good to, like you said, to kind of phase it out. Don't hold on to it forever. Just to kind of, as your grief process, as it progresses, you just, you kind of phase it out, I guess you could call it. So
Absolutely.
yeah. I know that one of the phrases that you hear over and over in movies, soap operas, all that stuff, they say, "Oh, don't worry, time heals all wounds." What would you have to say to that, sir?
No. Well, yes, in one regard, time heals all wounds, but it's how you manage that time.
Right.
It's how you utilize that time. And let me give you some reasons, if I might. We live in a world where it has been said that men don't cry, big boys don't cry. And oftentimes, when we suffer a loss, especially men, they tend to repress their emotion. Let me tell you, if you do not express your emotions, time will not heal that wound. We need to express our emotions. We need to cry when we feel like it. You see, God has given us these tear glands in order to be used. And if you don't express your emotions, I guarantee you time will not heal that wound. We also, when we have a loss, we tend to feel depressed and very lonely. We often feel as if though God in heaven no longer cares. Nobody cares really what I'm going through, you see. And with those kinds of feeling, if you don't walk through that type of emotion, time will not heal that wound. It will get worse, if you will. Then, of course, there are physical symptoms of distress. You are going to feel as you try to work through this loss that you have experienced, you see. And if you don't walk through these symptoms of distress, I guarantee you time will not heal that wound. As I mentioned earlier, we also tend to feel a sense of guilt with regard to the loss. If you don't walk through that, you will find yourself becoming more and more angry, angrier and angrier at people you think might have had an opportunity to do more than they really did, you see.
Yeah.
And so time will not heal those kind of wounds. So there are certain things we have to do in order to get to a place, not what I would term normalcy, but a new normal, if you will. Once you experience a loss, life will never be the same, because the person you shared all those beautiful moments with, all those wonderful experiences with, that person is gone. You can't go back and relive that, you see. But you can move on to a new normal with your life. And that's going to require some work. It's going to require you doing some things, perhaps even getting some expert help. You may have to do that in order to be able to take on a new normal with your life.
The end of your response actually segues into the next question I wanted to pose. Someone says, do I need psychological help? What kind of benefit do you feel like that could give someone?
Oh, absolutely. If you are stuck in what we call acute or morbid or abnormal grief for a long duration of time, yes, I would strongly recommend psychological help, because that tells me, number one, you are not making any progress. You are stuck. And when you are stuck, there's a good possibility darkness can consume you. And in that darkness, you will find depression. In other words, whenever you look up, rather than seeing the sun, all you will see are dark clouds. For you, the sun will stop shining. When the sun stops shining, that's when you need to seek psychological help, because you are in what we call the danger zone. And without expert help, you could find yourself in a place where you really don't want to be. So that's, if you're experiencing, as I said, morbid, acute, or abnormal grief, where you just don't want to do anything. You cannot function. You cannot even hold down a job. Anytime someone around you mentions the person's name, you get panicky, you get hostile, if you will. You feel as if though they're being insensitive. That's when you need to start looking at psychological help. It tells me you are over your head. You're in over your head. You're drowning.
Yeah.
You're drowning.
Okay. Actually, in one of your responses, you've kind of touched on it already. I guess I'll ask the question, kind of as a separate question, and you can kind of rehash it, if you will. Someone may say, will I ever be the same?
Ah, very good question, my friend. Well, there are a lot of people who resist returning to reality. They are very comfortable where they are in the grief process. By that, I mean they don't want to go back or move ahead with life. Because, again, as I mentioned earlier, they feel as if though they're being unfair to the person who passed on. Now, I'll tell you, even though one might struggle to affirm reality, in other words, to move on, it's incumbent upon us to do so, knowing that you will never be the same person you used to be. You will not, because a big part of you will now be missing. However, you can cultivate new friendships. You can go out and do things. In the process of doing things, let me tell you what it does for you. In order for one to heal, you're going to need others. You cannot do it alone. And that's where friends and relatives come in. Now, there are some relatives who don't understand the grief process, some friends who don't understand the grief process. They'll tell you stuff, well, hey, it's been 5 months, man, you need to start living. You see, they mean well, but that's not how grief works. However, you need to do everything within you that's going to help you lead to a healthy lifestyle. In other words, to get back to a new reality. So, no, you will never be the same, but you could be better. You could be healthier. At the same time, you could be weaker and sicker. It all depends on you and how much you want to get back to that new normal, how much you want to be able to reaffirm your reality.
I know the one sentiment that always got me was, someone comes up to you, they're like, I guess, in my case, like, David, I tell you, I know just how you feel, and it's one of those things where, I'm having to like contain what I really want to say or emote, because it's like, last time I checked, you haven't walked this path that I'm walking. So, if someone says, okay, I have a friend that's in grief, how can I help? I mean, how would you advise someone that says that wants to help a friend, but they don't know how?
I will tell them, look, the best thing you can do for a person who is grieving is to be a good listener. Let them speak, let them emote, because in the process of emoting, that becomes a catharsis to their soul. It provides a good cleansing. And when they know that they have someone who is listening without being judgmental, someone who's willing to listen without offering advice, they just want someone who will listen to them without judging them or telling them how they are to be feeling, you see. And that's the thing. So when someone says to you, oh, David, I know exactly how you're feeling, and they have never walked your road that you are walking, you know that, hey, this person can't offer you anything. They have nothing to tell you, really.
Yeah.
Because they have their spouse to go home to.
Yeah.
Now, someone who has been there, they can share with you how it impacted them. But their experience or experiences may not necessarily be yours, you see. Yours could be different, but at least they can empathize with you because they have walked that road, you see.
Yeah, it's, in that particular case, that particular example, it's like knowing that that person has a similar perspective, really, it gives value to what they're saying. It's like you're saying, it's like, their specific details may be different, but their perspective, is the same. So, so yeah, that's big, that's huge, and probably after the third time, that someone said it to me, I pretty much, was able to calm myself and just able to kind of, look past it. It's like, okay, their intentions are good. They just, it's just not coming out right. You know what I mean? So.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
All right. If someone says, what, now I'll preface this, like with the kind of technology we have with, photography and video and all that, the chances of this may not be as great, but I know even with some things technology can't replace. And so if someone says, will I forget their voice or their laugh or their face? I mean, is that normal for someone to feel that way?
Well, no, it's normal. It's normal for someone to feel that way because your significant other may have had a unique laugh that every time you heard it, man, it just caused your heart, to go pitter patter. And yes, that's normal. That's normal. And that is something you may never want to forget. I can tell you that in my case, my first wife, man, she had a smile that no matter what was going on with me, if I had a bad day at work when I got home and she smiled at me, all my cares just rolled away. And sometimes I would be driving down the road and I could just picture that smile. Sometimes if I was having a gloomy day, I could just picture that smile, and immediately my whole world would lit up as if though someone had just lit a million candles. But again, those kind of things, it's just like memories. You may have gone on a certain vacation and it generated a particular memory that will last with you forever. That kind of stuff you don't want to forget. Because what that does, those memories still keep the person alive in you, still keep the person alive to you. You can think about them without getting sad and gloomy. You can think about them in a joyful manner, a delightful manner. I still remember with a sense of joy a Euro excursion my first wife and I took throughout Europe, riding the trains during the day, staying in nice hotels at night. Every time I think about that, it just makes me come alive. Those are the kind of things that you need to remember. Those are the kind of things you want to cherish. Those good memories. Because when you do that, the person will always be near and dear to you. They remain in your heart forever. But you're able to go on with your new reality, your new sense of normalcy.
Yeah.
So in other words, you are getting the best of both worlds. You see, even though they're gone, you can still have their memories cheering you up. They can still be in your heart as one of your greatest cheerleaders while you are going forth, embracing and affirming your new reality.
All right, Dr. Wilkins. Gonna give you the last word on this. I know that it's definitely managing grief, coping with grief. It's definitely a process. Something that takes time, takes the right attitude, right mindset, and whatnot. I mean, yeah. What are your final thoughts for us?
Well, yes, grief involves loss, and in this journey called life, we all experience different types of losses. When we have a loved one who develops an illness of some sort, one that inevitably leads to the individual passing on, of course, the longer they are with us, most times it's the easier the grief process becomes, because we go through a period of anticipatory grief where we have the individual, even though we know that there's a good possibility they may not be around much longer. But we make that time for them and for us the very best that we possibly can. We are able to tell them the things that we would like for them to know. In other words, it's easy for us to unburden our souls to them. We can ask for their forgiveness for any small trespass or sin we may have committed against them. And so when they pass on, because we have already said all the things we wanted to say, and perhaps do most of the things we wanted to do, the grief process becomes a little bit easier. But when someone is taken away unexpectedly, a child, a young spouse, it becomes extremely difficult. And that's when we have to realize that We need others in our lives, especially God. You see, oftentimes we become very angry at God, asking him, why did he allow this and why did he allow that? But I can tell you, in dealing with grief and counseling others throughout the years, I have found that individuals with a mature faith, they tend to do a whole lot better in the grief process. And I'll tell you why, because they have learned the secret that even though there are times when God may seem as if though he's very far away, they can still trust him. They can trust him with their present and they can trust him with their future. And so they know that they are never alone. He is always with them, never to leave them nor forsake them. They know that regardless of what they are going through, God's grace will be sufficient. They saw it in their mother's lives, they saw it in their father's lives, and so they know the same thing or the same God that worked wonders for mom and wonders for dad will also do wonders for them as well. And so they are able to walk through the grief process, facing it head on, trusting God every step of the way. Grief is something we should never do alone. Do it with others, but more so, do it with God.
That's great insight, Dr. Wilkins. I'm so appreciative for your time. We love you guys. I know that we trust, we hope and trust that we're much closer to the end than we are at the beginning of this thing called the pandemic. As always, your help and your insight is greatly appreciated. We thank you for your time.
And anything else that I use, don't hesitate to call on me, because I'm a firm believer that to whom much is given, much is required.
I hope that today's presentation can be useful to you, can have purpose. Remember, when you find yourself needing an outlet, reach out to that family member, that friend, that coworker. Obviously, you want it to be someone that you can trust. Thanks again for watching, and hope to see you on the next video.